Welcome to Voices of Women. I'm Chris Stanis, your host, and also the founder of Women of Wisdom Foundation, which has been around since 1993. We are going into our 30th annual conference this March 24th through 27th. It's hard to believe that we're here still 30 years. Our theme this year is Celebrating Our Sacred Pearls, Nourishing the Waters of the Feminine. We have lots of experiential workshops to choose from. We have interesting panels on topics of interest for women, and also two great keynote speakers, Rianne Eisler and Cynthia James. So check it all out on our website, womenofwisdom.org. And today I'm going to be speaking with one of our workshop presenters, Dr. Adhi Two Owls. Dr. Adhi is a practicing healer in the mythology of shamanism and dowser. Her PhD is therapeutic counseling and philosophy for her research into the positive effectiveness of traditional healing methods on the mental physical health. Adhi is also an artist and has been making sacred tools, instruments, and other items to facilitate ceremony, healing, and personal discovery. For 26 years, she has traveled all over the United States, Canada, and places beyond as a teacher and researcher to understand the wealth of knowledge the earth offers us and to seek solutions to the challenges we face as we evolve forward on our planet. So you can go to her website and find out more about her on thenewglobalshaman.com. And she is giving her workshop at the conferences now in this moment. So welcome, Adhi. We're in this moment right now.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our
Yes. Well, but first tell us about your name, how that came about, what it means to you.
Oh, okay. So way back in the day when I first started, and I was learning about indigenous traditions, but also earth-centered traditions. I was early on in my shamanic journey. Okay. And I was living in Connecticut at that time, and I was going to work. I was working at a rock garden, a rock shop, basically called the Rock Garden. And I was heading down I-95, which is a busy thoroughfare in Connecticut, and I saw this large bird on the side of the road. And I remember just pulling over and jumping out of my car, heavy rush hour traffic, picking up this bird, sticking it in the passenger seat, closing the door, and getting back behind the wheel of the car and just shaking. And that was my first owl medicine gift. So that was a great horned owl. And I went through the process of releasing its spirit and sort of understanding the aspects of great horned owl in relationship to my spiritual development. And I resisted it. I said, no, I don't want owl medicine. I know enough about owl medicine to say, not really. And then fast forward 9/11, and then I was going down to North Carolina in 2002, and I was going to be studying with a teacher down there, and I was on the very last trip with my stuff. And I was on 81, and I'm driving along at sunset, and I see this wing flap up, and I was like, that's an owl. So I made a big turn and came and picked up that owl. And that's when I said, I'll take on owl medicine. And one of the things about names and changing names is that, we go through a process of awakening. So I grew up in a garden variety alcoholic Catholic family, and I had an Irish Catholic name that kind of went with that. And at some point through my sort of discovery of myself, I realized my name really didn't fit. So part of the process of changing one's name is to actually grow into who you are becoming. So the Two Owls comes from that medicine that was given to me. And then I was working with my teacher in North Carolina, and she said, eventually we're going to have to do a naming ceremony. You're going to have to sort that out. And so Moon Yen, which is the middle name I have, was actually given to me in my 20s because my birth name was Maureen, which is a great name, but I was never called it growing up. I was a Mo. I was just like, it was just not my name. And then I became an adult and people were calling me Maureen. It was just awkward. But I met a woman in my 20s who just said, well, your name should be Moon Yen. It's not Maureen. And I said, okay. And I have no idea where that came from. I Googled it. But it worked for a while. And then I just kept it. And I named my studio after it for a while. And then so I said, okay, Moon Yen Two Owls. That sounds like a good name. But it didn't feel complete. And I was kind of like, so I was reading a book on Buddha Dharma, Buddha practices. And there's a word in Buddhism called Abhi, Abhi, and it means clear or light. But I'm dyslexic, so I reverse letters around. So what I saw was a D. And I thought, Adhi Two Owls. I thought that kind of works. And so that's the name. That's kind of the progression of how I got the name. It took a few years to kind of put it together.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting, a good story. So all this is all going on is you've been working in shamanism for many years. And so what got you interest with that? What was there something in your life, whether you were a child or later in your early years that was of interest to you?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I've always have been connected to nature. I just think the world is this amazing, magical place, and it just turns me on. Like I'm just totally, I go out in the woods and I'm happy. I'm on city streets, I'm happy. I just think everything is alive and teeming with magic. Okay. And like when I was a kid, I totally believed it was magic. You know, as an adult or, you know, you go through the disgruntled, you know, periods of time in your life where you kind of like dismiss all of that. But then I've always come back to the fact that that's what motivates me. That's what drives me. And for me, that's what shamanism is about. It's about the anima, the spirit in things, and being able to communicate and being able to sort of experience that. And, you know, it's taken different forms throughout my life. So I think my first experiences with, I would say, like shamanic trance or being in a sort of an altered state of mind was through my artistic development, like just standing in front of a canvas and putting paint on it and going really deep into that process of exploration across the surface of the, so that led to very deep uh, transcendental experiences. And of course, I was going to an art school, and when I talked about them, people were kind of like, we just don't like the blue. Just so so that was kind of like my first experience that there's something out there trying to communicate or something deeper about my consciousness and its connection to something bigger and more mysterious. And of course, that led to like weird things like witchcraft and tarot and all the things that you kind of explore when you're in your 20s. But it was when I came back to Connecticut and I was, my life kind of disintegrated, I guess is what I was supposed to say. So like now my Saturn return, if you're an astrologer, so that all kind of lined up and came back to Connecticut. And I just like, I want to do something different with my gifts and my talents. And I don't know what that is. And I can't say I ever really called it shamanism. And even a lot of the stuff that people were calling shamanism, I have like big question marks about what they were calling shamanism. And there's more research on that now. And I'll talk about that actually in the meetup I'm doing later this month.
All right.
So, but the idea of shamanism, that word came much later. To me, it was more, I was having an experience where I was opening up to the world, opening up to nature, opening up to things around me. And the more I worked on myself and the more I healed myself and the more I recovered myself, the more I was able to go deeper into this sort of conversation that's happening on the planet. And shamanism is defined usually by the geography of a place, the culture, the mythology, the cosmology, the language, the traditions that are built around it. So shamanism takes many forms and many shapes, depending on where you're at. So for me, my shamanism is based on living in a modern world with modern cities and modern technologies, as well as the relationship that has with nature and finding harmony within those two seemingly different, unrelated ecologies. So for me, that's kind of, you know, and that, you know, all of it, you know, there's the making sacred tools piece, you know. So you open up to nature and nature gifts you things. So then you begin to assemble things that become extensions of your spiritual practice. So they might be rattles, or they might be drums, or they might just be a collection of stones that you lay out, etc. But all these things are related to just kind of opening up to the world around me and just being present and not having expectations and not having an agenda. Because I think that's the thing right now. It's like, you know, we have all sorts of rules about how we should be spiritual or what direction is this and all of that. And that's all mixed up in everything I've learned, but also, if I'm really honest, if I look at all of this stuff, it's just another kind of colonizing. So I'm always trying to have invite a conversation with myself and the ecology and the environments that I go into. So that's kind of, I guess, I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think it kind of gives you an idea of where I come from with shamanism. Like it's not a specific tradition, it's not a specific lineage, but it's a way that I was facilitated to be awakened into the world and to work with things as they come to me and around me. And,
We talked before too. I mean, there's this sense, I think people think shamanism is Native American, and then the whole thing of misappropriation, and shamanism is in many cultures.
Yeah.
Our old European culture that many of us come from, and who've lost that connection. I know when I was doing events at Seattle Unity Church, we brought a very elder woman from kind of very tribal from Asia, from Russia. She actually came with other people, and she spoke her native language, was translating to Russian, translating to English. And she was very elderly, but that was quite the event. But I think that was a very shamanic, they had a very shamanic tradition there in that region in Russia. And we hear of things of people going down to Peru or South American places and studying with shamans and all that. So what is so it can become very trendy to study with people, and I think it's a matter of discerning, like what really discerning who you can really learn from, and who's authentic, I think is what the word I want, looking for that authentic experience yourself.
Right, absolutely. And one of the things we have to remember is that there are probably only one or two unbroken lineages of indigenous people on the entire planet left. Okay, so that's just a reality. And most of these traditions have been not practiced for hundreds of years on the long scale, and just hundreds of years. But usually once a tradition has been broken for a generation or two, it's very hard to recover and reclaim the fullness of that tradition. So when people talk about shamanism, there's the like, where does the word shaman come from? So when I first learned it, I was told it comes from the word shaman or shamanka, and it comes from Russia. Recently, and I do mean recently, I've discovered, I've read the research, and I don't have her book in front of me, and I wish I did, and I don't want to mutilate her name. Okay, anyway, but I'll send you it for the notes. But she talks about where did this word come from? And through her research, she realized that at one point Russia was like this vast empty territory, and it was during the time when the Dutch and the English and France and Portuguese were all just like grabbing land all around the world, and Russia said, we have to jump on the board and we have to grab land. So they basically began to sort of look at Siberia, and Siberia was like the West in the United States. It was just, in their mind, it was just empty land for the taking. So the original maps begin to just have just blank land. But as they begin to explore, you begin to see it being populated, like how maps are, and they put little people in and things like that to sort of indicate what things are. But they began to call them various things, mostly savages and primitives, things like that, as most colonizers do when they explore land. And eventually Catherine the Great hired a bunch of German surveyors and things to go across Russia. And they were the ones who sort of coined the word shaman based on what they decided these particular primitive people were, if they were medicine people, whatever. So it's not even a traditional word, which I just like blew my mind when I was reading this research. And so even the word shaman itself isn't real. So, but to kind of bring it back to that point of authenticity and studying, we have to remember that unless you were born in a tradition, and this is pretty much true, you really are always going to be an outsider to that tradition. You're never really going to understand the nuance of being raised in that tradition. You don't have the language skills. You don't have the cosmology. You weren't raised in the social structures or the initiations that go into that. So, so really to embrace a particular tradition or a lineage, it's not really possible. You can get a glimpse, you can be empathetic, you can work within that tradition, it can inspire you, but you're never really going to be fully into that, you know, so there's that. And then there's just the misappropriation and, you know, kind of like the oppressors get to write the spiritual tradition. So all we know about shamanism is actually written by privileged white people. I just want to point that out, okay? All of the books, all of the ways these traditions are presented, the way they take groups down and they keep, and they bring them to shamans or medicine people, and we work on, it's all very sort of colonized and all very controlled by a very privileged group of people, usually to make a certain amount of money. So there's that piece. There's also, when we get into the plants, I'm not just talking about the psychoactive plants, but just the medicine plants. For a while, and I was on with a group of people, we were trying to get support to help with litigation with this. But a lot of times, pharmaceutical companies would send people down to these retreats, and they would learn about different plants from the medicine people, and then they would go back and get an international patent. And that pharmaceutical company owned that plant, and no longer could the Native American people use that plant, or the, not Native American, but the indigenous people of that place use that plant. And that was happening pretty rampantly up until like 2015. And then I kind of had to move on to other things. But I think Colombia was the first first country with where indigenous people were able to actually file protections for their indigenous people and their plants. So, but there's so much misunderstanding, and there's so much of that still sort of patriarchal colonizing that people don't want to look at and don't want to deal with, you know, and that I think is hard, especially when you're trying to rise something up that's more authentic, that's actually more real, that's about who we are right now in this time, in this place. And
Right.
I could go on and on. There's so much I can talk about.
No, well, it's interesting because I think it just takes awareness, and some people, you just aren't really aware of the the whole impact of colonization, and the impact that what you just said about herbal plants then being owned by pharmaceutical companies and no longer owned by the people that use them, who know their herbal plant, you know, it's their culture. It's just, you know, it's really about educating and making people aware of that. So, and so I'm getting from you is like your shamanism is your own personal journey. Like my shamanism is looking at what's meaningful for me. What do I use plants for? How do I connect with the earth? All that. And so one thing I want to talk about, because of your workshop being called Now, in this moment, is a topic of impermanence, and talking about that concept, what it means for you, and why is that important now to be in this moment now?
Well, I think what's happening is there's this, we're actually moving to a place of really cathartic entropy on the planet. It's the climate that is unraveling and sort of making this planet inhospitable. People are going to be migrating. Religious and spiritual traditions are no longer serving the communities that they were brought up in. Art, music, everything is sort of moving through this kind of chaotic entropy. It's like everything is sort of winding down from, you know, I would say a peak of high output and work and creativity, et cetera. So we're kind of in this place of things kind of, you know, the wheels are coming off the car. It's kind of just getting ready to kind of go plump. And, you know, and I think it's incredibly frightening. And I'm going to also sort of say the problems are vastly huge, and nobody really wants to deal with how big, like some of these things are, like mass migration for resources and things like that. And part of, I think, my work is, and I think this comes from my own journey of just having to deal with change as it comes up. But one of the things I learned is that if I can be fully present, if I can just be here where it is right now, and I'm not in denial, and I'm not talking myself out of the reality, and I'm not medicating myself out of the reality, if I am totally present, I have everything I need to resource and maybe fix or do the next right thing to serve whatever it is that needs to be done. And I also think we're in a time where we need to move from the self to service. I think that's the other big thing that's changed in spirituality. For a long time, it was all about navel gazing and taking care of yourself and, me, I. And now it has to be we. And I think that's what has to happen. We have to move from self to service. And that's the big awakening. That's the huge awakening.
Yeah, and I think there's a need to even bring that awareness to people. I've been aware of it. We've been aware of it, Woman of Wisdom, 30 years.
Mhm.
10 years, 15 years into that, there was could see less of a need that people came to get their souls fed, to get their spirit fed, to get, take care of their wounds, their healing.
Mhm.
And there's a shift that needed to happen of the service aspect, that we're there to help other people. We're there to be together in community and grow together. And so that there's a shift to we, and part of that with Woman Wisdom is educating people with that it's not, you don't just come to get, you really come to the conference to give. And in that giving, you do receive back.
Right.
It's just the nature of it. So I think you're right on about that. It's just, and we see it so much around us of our Western culture of the me. And I think we're all pretty tired of it.
Mhm.
And it takes us inside ourselves to shift that.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's interesting because I think COVID, as horrible as it is like that was the sort of impetus for people to sort of like stop, like just stop. Like they're not running to do things. They're not having to, fill their life up with things and stuff and experiences. And I think that was pretty unsettling for a lot of people, but also it made them realize how little they had of their humanity. I think that's the other piece of this. That's the other thing that's coming out of this, is that it's not a matriarchal thing, and it's not a patriarchal thing, and it's not a money thing, and it's a humanity thing. Like we're coming back to our humanity. We're learning how to be, decent human beings, as I like to put it. Give a shit. It's like really just like show up and show that you care, not just for yourself, but for the world that gives you so much, that offers you so much. When I do prayers for, and I close, I always say, everything from above, but also everything that comes from the earth that feeds us and nurtures us, everything that's around us. And then, the middle world is our heart, and our job is to be kind and fall in love with the world. So.
Yes, and I mean, you were talking about it can be overwhelming because you read one thing, then read another, and it's like, how can I save the manatees that are starving now? How can I, there's the polar bear. You just get kind of overwhelmed, and I think it's like, so for people to find what that's important to you, and to do what you can do. And what you're passionate about, because yes, we can't fix everything, but what's the one thing I can do?
Well, and I also think it's part of it is making the world small. So the world gets big sometimes, and everyone is isolated in the big world. And then it gets small again, and everyone can interact, and a lot of information is exchanged. So the world is getting big again. And I think when the world gets big, we have to focus on community. We have to focus on where we're at. So I had a teacher who used to say, your community is only as healthy as the sickest person in it. And I think that was really sage advice, because wherever we live, we have to look at what's happening around us, what's in our cities, what's in our communities, what's going on. And I think that's part of the big healing too, is that we reestablish communities, we reestablish, being good neighbors, showing up, things like that. And I think that's part of also what's happening right now. Because you're right, we can't all go save the manatees or the whales or do all of that stuff, but we can show up at our town hall meeting and make sure that our water is owned by our municipality and not Nestle. You know,
Mhm.
we can, make sure that the elderly in our communities have someone have resources for people to check in to make sure that they're okay and blah blah blah. We can do all of those things, and that's I think the switch also. It's like I think we all thought like to be spiritually awake, we had to go to Peru or we had to go to some sacred place and we had to live in some magical land because we had ascended. And that's not really how it works. you know, you know.
Yeah, that's like, think globally, act local. I mean, I think I've heard that phrase
Mhm.
before. It's that
Yeah, yeah.
we can make more impact here. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, voting for the president, but our local elections are sometimes even more important because they're what impact us here. And so the same for organizations of, saving the land that you're on, saving the water that's in your area, in your region. So, well, we're getting to the end of our time, and I know I want to share, you're going to be exhibitor at the conference, so you have your art. So that's an important piece in this of your work. And also you are doing a meetup for us. So if people can go to our Woman of Wisdom meetup page, Woman of Wisdom Foundation Northwest. And I believe it's next Monday, January 24th. Is that correct? And you'll be talking a lot of this subject about shamanism. And so people can check that out, plus a lot of other meetups we have, and check out your workshop at the conference. Which is on this whole topic. Now, what is it now in this moment? Yeah, how do we stay in this moment now to really be present? So any last words you want to give people before we sign off?
We live in a really amazing planet. Like nowhere else in the universe have we found yet a planet like what we have. And I know it's easy to say humans have ruined it, but I encourage us to say we didn't ruin it. We just got really successful at what we did, and we kind of got lost. And now our job is to take that success and where it brought us, and see how we can, refold that into a different kind of way. Self-hatred never served anybody, and I think we have to refrain from saying human beings are bad. Human beings are the ones that should not be here because we were birthed from this experience. Everything on the planet led to us. 13.5 billion years ago, we were put into the making. And it's important to remember that we're part of this. And we're also part of the forward history and part of the forward story. And we're just going to go through something that's going to make the world very different. And also it's going to profoundly affect us and make us different. So I think showing up is what's most important right now. And being open to whatever that is and willing to adapt and evolve into it. So.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much, Chris.
And yeah, you can go to Adhi's website is thenewglobalshaman.com and check out all our offerings at womanofwisdom.org for the conference, March 24th through the 27th. So I'll be back with more interviews with more amazing presenters. And so stay tuned.